session, but thank you all for joining us today for our conversation with Phil Deering of Second Day. And he is an alum of the college, and I'll let him introduce himself in a minute. But my name is Beth, and I work at the College Career Education Center. I am an advisor for students interested in government, nonprofit, and education. And I think by extension, social impact is one of these spaces that kind of crosses a bunch of industries. But this whole idea of doing good and being persons for and with others, I think is something that's really applicable here. So we're really excited to have Phil join us. He's been an awesome alumni contributor over the last few years, and he can talk more about his journey. He starting up his organization Second Day, along with other Georgetown alumni. But feel free, once Phil gives his introduction, feel free. This is meant to be a conversation. So, I know it's lunchtime. So even if you've got your lunch in front of you, which I will have in a few minutes, please don't be afraid to just pop in and ask your question. And, we can try and make this as interactive as we can. But anyways, Phil, thank you so much for joining us this Friday. Happy April Fools.
Indeed. Happy Friday. Lovely to meet you all. As Beth mentioned, I graduated from the college in 2015. I had a fabulous time at Georgetown. I love Georgetown. We can talk about all the different, I was in a bunch of different clubs and activities and whatever. I don't know if any of y'all have been in Gives, but that was one of my big things. I helped start Gives. So wonderful to be with you all. Happy to talk about whatever is helpful. I'll quickly just map out sort of my path since Georgetown, and talk about Second Day and the work we do, and then happy to do whatever is most helpful to y'all. So the origin of Second Day comes from my experience when I was in college. That I love my time at Georgetown. I was super passionate about some sort of social impact career, but I wasn't necessarily called to doing Teach for America or the Peace Corps or Jesuit Volunteer Corps, or some of these main programs. I was really nervous about if I went directly to work for a nonprofit, that it might be sort of a dead end. I might not be able to sort of navigate and move up. I was, super ambitious, and felt just kind of lost and couldn't find many resources to help me navigate it. I ended up sort of avoiding the problem as I was graduating, because I found out from a friend that was a couple years older about the field of nonprofit consulting, and got a role at Bridgespan, which is a nonprofit consulting firm. I'm here in Boston. And that was amazing. And I got to do a bunch of work with philanthropy, deploying hundreds of millions of dollars to transform the criminal legal system, for a bunch of research and writing, helping with diligence, helping national nonprofits to figure out their financial sustainability, all different types of work. I really loved it, but this notion of how hard it was for me to figure out how to navigate a career driven in social change, navigating the financials, navigating the dynamics of career advancement, all of that, it stuck with me. It resonated with friends, a mix of folks who were either struggling to make it working an impact career, or working in a career or job that they really didn't love, but didn't know how to change that or navigate it. And then of course the intersectionality and all of that I had no student debt when I graduated. It was really hard. But for folks with debt that are first gen, it's a whole nother level of complexity and challenge and nuance. And so that both personal experience and mapping out the inequities that exist in the social sector writ large motivated me and a couple Georgetown friends to launch Second Day. Second Day comes from a Twain quote: "The two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why." We're here to help people to find their second day. And tactically, that means we do a bunch of research, writing, mentorship, community building on a social impact career, how to build one. And social impact, we truly mean cross-sector, government, nonprofit, social enterprise. There's a whole conversation to be had about the different roles and trade-offs that each of those different sectors and within that roles can play, the pitfalls and challenges that exist and are common. And then the other main thing that we do is we run a fellowship program. Applications are actually due, well, first round applications are April 4th, so like Monday. And then there's like a secondary deadline, April 24th or 5th or something. But if y'all are still looking for summer internship stuff, you should totally apply to that. But we run a couple different fellowship programs that are connecting folks with paid internships, and then we pair that with a bunch of these discernment conversations, job search tactic conversations, helping to thrive in the role, and if you're stepping up to a role that you haven't done before, mentor support, coaching there. And our big thing is that everyone that comes through our program, we really want to commit to supporting them to find their first full-time role in social impact. And not every person works as a first time in social impact. For a lot of folks, we say, let's be strategic. Actually, you should do this other role that maybe you're less passionate about, but it'll set you up well. We help folks to navigate that transition and path. So I'll pause there. I'm happy to talk about whatever's on your mind. If you want to talk about sector trends, if you want to talk about job search tactics, if you want to talk about the program, if you want to talk about Bridgespan, nonprofit consulting, happy to talk about whatever's on your mind today.
Yeah, and folks, feel free, if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, to send me a text or put something in the chat. But to get us started, Phil, if you could think back to, late March, early April of 2015, you're finishing up your classes, you're all of a sudden staring at this thing called graduation, and you need something afterwards. Can you talk about, kind of, to the best of your recollection, what that job search process looked like for you, and some of the things that you did to, explore and then ultimately find a job?
Yeah. So my personal job search is probably not the most helpful, because I got the role by like December. Nonprofit consulting will sometimes have like earlier timelines to try and mirror the like for-profit consulting craziness. But what I can say is, through our programs, we've supported a few hundred folks in that transition. And I want to name like a couple of key data pieces that might, if you're a senior graduating trying to figure this out, around 75% of our fellows got roles in May, June, July, not before that. Because unless you're a massive corporation and can just be like, sure, we can allocate millions of dollars to say we're going to hire a class of 50 people, like, real organizations can't do that. And so for the vast majority of social impact jobs, it's just in time hiring, which means, someone leaves or they have the budget and they're like, we need a project associate. And then they try and hire for a project associate, and they want someone to start as soon as possible, which means that until now, if you're graduating in May, it wouldn't even be worth it to apply, because, it takes on average like a couple months to interview and start a role. Like, now is the time to start applying. And so even for our fellows that, we've been supporting for months, for years, to be on their game, to be networking, to be doing all of these things, most of them didn't actually get a role until May, June, July, because that's the nature of how life works. And so the big thing is, I know it can feel super anxiety provoking, daunting, that people that are in more traditional corporate fields are all sort of saying that they're like, they've got this dream perfect position, and what we've seen time and time again is that, like, yes, it's anxiety producing, but if you go through and listen to Beth and the Career Center and go through the tactics of going out and talking to people and actively making progress day after day, week after week, applying to some roles, talking to a bunch of alums, like being out there and searching, the chances of success are really quite high. The folks who weren't employed for 6 or 12 months that we saw from our program are disproportionately folks who weren't doing that. And some of that's totally great. Like, they needed a break, they got totally burnt out, whatever. Or the other trap that people sometimes fell into was only applying to jobs on job boards, which we talk about time and time again, but like, the vast majority of roles are not going to be posted on Handshake or going to be posted like on these, Idealist, Indeed job boards. The vast majority of roles that are going to be filled are probably going to get filled before they ever post it. And the jobs that are posted on job boards are the most competitive because everyone's doing that and everyone's flooding them. So in terms of like allocating your time, we often say that folks should spend about 70 or 80% of their time being out talking to people. And we can talk tactics if you want about informational interviews, but not like just for the sake of it. There's some specific things there. And then only 20 or 30% actually updating a cover letter, resume, applying to roles, because the leverage that you get from talking to folks is so much higher than just sort of apply. And it's super demoralizing if you apply to 100 roles and like don't get interviewed for any of them. So I'll pause there. Yeah.
Thank you. And could you also maybe, Stephanie has a question. I have a quick question. This is a little programmatic, but Lauren asks about the fellowship. Is it only for full-time positions or for internships as well?
Yeah, so our program is only for internships for now. And so summer, that can be like 10 to 40 hours, depending on the position. We also do fall and spring internships we cap them at 20 hours, usually 10 to 15 hours. Yeah, and it's all internships, all paid at least $15 an hour, all social impact mission driven roles. We are hoping to expand into full-time positions and roles and stuff, but that's likely 2023, maybe this fall. We'll see. That's a place we're going to, not just do internships, but we started internships. That's our like true love. So that's where we started.
And I'm assuming that if a student is a graduating senior, that they should still kind of follow Second Day and reach out to you folks and have conversations. Because like I said, co-founders are all Hoyas, right?
You are welcome to apply to the internship if you're a graduating senior. The main thing is just like committing to the term that you commit to, which is usually like June to August. You'll actually do it. And I will say, if you're not deep in the application process, that's probably fine. We can help support you to be applying to full-time roles and figuring that out. And by the time you've actually sort of gotten your house in order and doing everything, it'll probably be August by then anyway. So.
All right. So we got some hands raised. So we're going to go ahead with Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to thank you for joining us today, Mr. Daring. I really appreciate it. I actually learned about Second Day a couple weeks ago and then saw this email for this info session a couple days ago. So I was pretty excited that I knew the name and was a bit familiar with it. But I know that you talked a little bit about the Peace Corps. You didn't necessarily want to go in that direction. The Peace Corps is something that I was thinking about in high school, but now that I'm at Georgetown, it doesn't feel like a very lucrative option to pay off all the student loans I'm incurring. So I was just wondering what advice you could give to the people that are kind of grappling with this like financial situation, but still really want to get involved in social work. And I would love to hear any advice you have on that.
Yeah. So I think development work in general is hard. There's a strong and growing movement, which is the right movement for global justice, to be hiring folks from in-country. You know, if you're doing work in Malawi, staff as many positions as possible for folks from that context, from that country, rather than US expats sort of popping in. Roles, unless it's like a USAID contractor position, which will, you know, a couple of these like DC based institutions will pay like a US based salary, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 while your cost of living super low. If you can get one of those gigs, that's actually great for student debt because you're going to be like netting a lot. But as you were saying, the vast majority of roles are going to be relatively lower paying and might be challenging with that. Broadly, in terms of debt, I have a couple thoughts. First of all, across the sector, there's like a massive difference in how much you can get paid. So if you're doing, you know, I think you mentioned social work, like if you're doing direct service, community organizing, social work, like one of the more depressing things is that's like the lowest paying role in social impact. That might be like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. Really hard to make it, really inequitable to access, just like all of these things, devaluation of like care in our society. It's a thing. It's something to navigate. Whereas if you go more and more towards like power systems, I guess would be the way to say this. If you're doing social impact consulting, if you're doing ESG, corporate, analysis, if you're doing philanthropy, like those roles often are higher paying, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. Not, might not be quite as much as banking or for-profit consulting, but like higher than the US median income coming out of college, like can definitely, work towards lunch. So there's a whole spectrum. And if, financial salary is important to you, it might make more sense to, go towards those more power facing roles. The last thing I'll say is that there is a lot of power in switching between sectors. I don't believe in a purity test. I don't believe in selling out. I think that the biggest thing is that if you do intentionally take a higher paying corporate role out of school, you just have to figure out a way to hold yourself accountable to that. I've seen so many people, the vast majority of people that go into a corporate role saying they're going to pivot later, never pivot because of path dependency and loss aversion. Loss aversion, meaning, say you're making $100,000, switching to then make $40,000 is almost impossible because you have your rent, you have your lifestyle, you have everything you've adjusted to. Like that cliff is so hard. Path dependency is that once you take a role, your mindset gets just totally sucked in there. Suddenly, everyone you're working with, everyone you're talking to is like focused on internal politics and getting an MBA and doing whatever. And it's so easy to get sucked into that. So that's also true, Beth. Yes, for sure. Student loan repayment. And it's increasingly a thing for nonprofits as like a benefit they offer too. So yeah, a couple thoughts there.
Perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate your input.
Okay, I think Masa is next, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, Phil. First of all, thank you so much for being here and speaking with us. I just had a question about what you mean exactly by social impact and whether that includes things like ESG and ESG consulting and ESG investing, or if it's something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fuzzy line for sure. Like I'm trying to figure out the best way to answer this. Actually, a helpful thing. So we write a bunch of different career guides. ESG is environmental social governance. It's basically for corporations, how their practices exist for like, are they destroying the environment and creating their products? Are they using slave labor? Do they have like diversity on their board and team? Like all of these things. And actually this ESG is a perfect example of like, it depends. Like a chunk of ESG initiatives are just risk mitigation. They're just backing up the corporation to make sure that they don't get bad press. Like you have to squint pretty hard to feel like that's impact. On the other hand, there are, upstart investors. Engine One took a couple board seats on ExxonMobil, if you were following this, like really pushing oil and gas companies to transform what they're doing. There's a ton of power working with private equity firms to only invest in firms that have certain metrics. So I think there is a thesis and an ability in that space to move the needle on corporate governance and how that works. And it really depends on what your theory of change within the role that you take and how to do that. The last thing I will say is I think in terms of like what is social impact or what is mission driven, we primarily focus on mission driven organizations, which means that the organization is primarily focused on some sort of social good. Because basically every company in America, my wife works at Wayfair furniture company, and they have a mission that like everyone should live in a home that they love, which I think is kind of beautiful. I think, people need furniture, but I wouldn't call that a mission-driven organization. Their primary incentive is profitability. And if they can like spin a mission statement that like resonates with employees, everyone's trying to do that right now. Everyone coming to info sessions is talking about their like CSR initiative and nice things they're doing. But like the core is like, why do you exist as an organization? Is it to solve some social issue? Because then you're a mission-driven organization.
Thank you so much.
I was going to say, tell us how you really feel about that, Phil. No, but I think you make a good point when we talk about mission-driven organizations. Especially at the Career Center, we get all kinds of organizations, and many of them have very good reputations that are really heavily selling this, whether we're talking about ESG or corporate social responsibility or working in the developing world, they sell it as like, yes, we do this, but there's always a but. And I think Phil makes a great point about like, are you doing something to help with a societal issue that's out there or not?
It's much better for firms to be doing good things in the world than not. I just think it's important to always understand and think about like why are certain organizations represented at Career Center events? It's probably because they have the resources and full-time staff to be like going to colleges everywhere and spending tons of money to be out there, and they've figured out the like optimal formula of how to sort of pitch their product working there to people. And for some people that's great. Just always remembering and acknowledging why and how this is sort of understanding the fundamentals of their business is helpful.
Yeah. Or I think like the whole example too of like, Starbucks is trying to make this push. I saw in the news towards everybody bringing their own cup, and they're, pushing it from there like, oh, look at us, we're a model employer, we're like environmentally conscious, this is going to save them the environment, which is true. But at the same time, what have we been experiencing? Like supply chain demands and probably increased costs of production of creating the cups. So like there's also that very real business decision going on.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's for sure a thing. We need to get rid of single-use coffee cups. Like that's ridiculous that we don't have like a culture of like using mugs and doing everything. But looking at the fundamentals, union busting, etc., you see the underlying business fundamentals for sure. Yeah. Also, one last thing. I know Lauren has a question. I think, Stephanie, were you the one interested in development? I'm just going to throw in a link, which is an awesome podcast I listened to a few weeks about this sort of like US dynamic in development that I think is really helpful to listen to and ground in as well.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So Lauren, please, you're next.
Hi, Phil. I wanted to thank you for coming to speak to us. I also saw your organization's from Austin, and I'm also from Austin, so it's like cool to see another Austin person here. So I was just wanting to ask you or follow up on your comment about the informational meetings that you were talking about setting up. So like I typically do that through like Hoya Gateway and just ask if alumni will speak to me. But my question is like two parts. Like first, I feel like a lot of nonprofits aren't really listed on like websites that are like consulting firms are like top 20 consulting firms, but you don't really have that for nonprofits. So like, how do you go about finding them? And then once you do, like, would you just contact someone on the leadership team and be like, can I speak to you about, I don't know how to like word it without saying like, I need something from you, or I'm like interested in your organization and I need a job, or like just like a better way of contacting them.
Yeah. Okay. So two questions here, and I'll answer them both in turn. So one is actually finding organizations that you're interested in. There are specific tactics around that. So you can just like Google, say you're in like environmental nonprofits in DC, and just like see what shows up. Or climate tech. You can look at job boards. One of the biggest things that is really helpful is to look at Idealist or Indeed or some of these job boards and not look at specific roles. Don't look like, oh, am I qualified for this role? Oh, am I qualified for this role? But instead look at the organizations that are posting and understand like that is an organization that is hiring. Even if I'm not interested in that specific role or not qualified for that specific role, maybe I can talk to someone there to see if there is a role that could be a good fit. So that's another way to find orgs. There's also every nonprofit in the US is required to report a 990, which sort of outlines their financials and existence. And so, we know that there are about 1.2 million nonprofits in the US, 70,000 that have a budget over $1 million, which means they would hire regularly. Like it's actually a almost graspable number of entities and organizations. And so there are some, ProPublica and GuideStar/Candid both have ways for you to sort of like search databases for sector, type, or location. And so lots of ways to find organizations for sure. And it's totally worth taking some time to just like come up with a list of 20 organizations that you think are cool, whether or not they have a role right now. In terms of reaching out to them, you can do it on Hoya Gateway, you can do it on LinkedIn, you can do it via email. You can usually guess someone's email. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but you can usually guess someone's email. Almost every company has like a standard, like we're phil@secondday.org. If you have my email, but you wanted to reach out to someone else on my team, you could probably guess it's their first name @secondday.org. And there's like Hunter and some other web applications that'll help you with that. But in terms of reaching out, the biggest thing you want to say is that you're seeking information, because you are. And adding two things. One, why you're reaching out to them specifically. You could be reaching out to anyone, like what caught your eye about them, what they've done, what their organization does, like them. And then the second is like what you hope to learn, including a question or two that you're grappling with, trying to figure out whether you want to work in the environment or in housing, or trying to understand like what the local environment scene even looks like, who the cool players are, whatever the questions you are. You can be authentic here. So add why you're reaching out to them, what you want to know, and then like a call to action, which is do you have time for a half hour in the coming weeks to connect? Are there a couple times that work for you? Just doing those three things are going to like dramatically increase the response rate, because I get emails all the time. If it's unclear that they're emailing me specifically, I'm much less likely to respond, because it might just feel like they're just like emailing a bunch of people and they don't really need to talk to me. But if someone's like, hey, I saw you went to Georgetown, I saw you started Second Day, like I'd love to learn more about what it's like to start a nonprofit organization, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, this person is clearly like actually knows who I am and actually like has questions they want to talk. Like, sure, I can make 30 minutes to chat with them. Like, so tactics on both of those. Happy to go into more details. Also, our programs go into lots of details there, but happy to go further there too.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Lauren, also we have, I don't know how many of you know this, but in addition to like the general Callie newsletter, we also do industry specific newsletters you can sign up for. And we try to put different relevant opportunities in those newsletters. This area of social impact kind of crosses business, health, science, and technology, because it gets into like the entrepreneurial space, and mine, which is government, nonprofit, and education. So I can put that link in the chat to make sure that you're on those lists. And yeah, coming and brainstorming with us, we're also open. And while I agree that like job boards can be overwhelming, the handshake algorithm is actually really advanced. So if you start actually interacting with handshake and you mark favorite employers and you apply to jobs and you come to events like this, like, it took your information that like, oh, hey, you registered for this event with social impact. When you get on your home screen, a lot of the opportunities that come up on your home screens become more and more relevant the more you use it. So yeah, I will say that that's one thing that handshake has in its favor over, say, Indeed, which is just like everything and super overwhelming. So yeah, anybody else have any other questions, whether it's about starting a nonprofit, social impact, maybe experiences Phil has with some social impact organizations out there? This is really a chance to, network. All right, Kaylee, do you want to go ahead and come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, sorry, I'm somewhere with a lot of background noise, so I didn't want to distract everyone with my camera on too. I was just wondering from your point of view, from your experience, whether as an undergraduate or even now, like as a more seasoned professional, what the biggest pros and cons were in your view about working in the private sector versus the nonprofit sector? Because I know, at least working in social impact, there's that connection to both sides of it. Obviously, like the monetary part, but also like fulfillment personally with actually creating something that helps other people. So I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to answer that broadly. I mean, you have the general, not myths, but stereotypes will say that like private sector, you're going to get paid more, you're going to have more training, you're going to have more resources. Working at a nonprofit, like you're much more likely to actually care about what you're doing. It's more meaningful. It's trying to do good work in the world, but you might have relatively less training, infrastructure, resources, salary. That's like broad level, but it's really hard to answer that sector wide because it is just like vastly different. Within private sectors, there are amazing companies to work for, and there are terrible companies to work for. Within the nonprofit, it's the exact same thing. Like there are organizations, like when I worked at Bridgeband, it was a nonprofit. I got paid very well. I had like the best training, resourcing, apprenticeship that I've like ever seen. It was amazing. It had all of the resources of a for-profit organization. It just happened to be incorporated as a nonprofit. And on the same side, there are totally organizations that are not going to pay a fair wage, that are not going to have any, support, training, infrastructure, no promotion pathways. And so I don't necessarily have an opinion on them. In fact, I'm fairly agnostic about how an entity is incorporated. I think it's more important to like ask the questions that are important to you. Like, how much money do I really need to make? Like, what skills do I want to build? Like, asking questions about internal promotion opportunities, management, support, training, like asking those actual questions as you go through the interview process, rather than blindly assuming that like some one sector or another will be like good or bad. I guess that's sort of where my head's at.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And that's where interviews are really helpful. Like I always say, if your spidey sense is tingling in an interview, when there's something that just seems a little off, whether it's about like a boss that you're interviewing with or something about the culture, like pay attention to that. Because usually like those cultural things do show up somewhere in an interview. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right. Lauren. Oh, that's a good question. Do you want to ask it on camera or?
It's fine. I got it. It's good.
Okay, cool.
I dropped in the doc. We have like a ton of these different like guides and resources and whatever, and this is interviewing your interviewer. So at that point, Kaylee, I'm sure Kali has a bunch of resources and stuff too, but in case it's helpful, here are some like common questions and positioning to do some both like offline research before applying and while you're talking to folks. Okay, Lauren, so conflicted about nonprofit space versus trying law. I feel like you're like reading into my soul here, because my grandfather was a lawyer. Both my parents are lawyers. My sister is a lawyer. So I'm surrounded by lawyers. I was never personally interested in law, but I know a ton of people that are interested in going to law school. And I will say this. This wasn't really what you asked, but I will say this. If you are passionate about social impact, you should be very, very, very careful about going to law school. It is actually I think it's the biggest trap of any grad school I've seen in terms of funneling people that are passionate about social impact away from the impact that they want to do. And it's for a couple of reasons. One, the student debt load out of law school is really high. I think the average is like 150,000 now. It's like crazy high. The number of like merit slots into law school is lower than most other grad school program types. And so if you have debt now, like, or not, like it's a thing. And then coming out of the market, it's sort of like what y'all are experiencing now in undergrad, except way worse. Basically, the way it works is the summer after your first year of law school, you have a chance to like interview for a big corporate law job. And the internship is between your second and third year, and then you get a full-time role. And so basically you have to decide immediately whether you want to try and get one of those jobs that everyone is clamoring for, that's going to pay $200,000, that's going to be, helping large companies prevent their employees from suing if they're sexually harassed, or other like things that you might not love, but like they're the people who are paying. That's what corporate law is. Most people can't pay $1,000 an hour. You're going to have this choice between going after this or saying, I'm going to wait until the last couple months of my third year of law school. to try and get a role doing this work. My friend is graduating now. He's super passionate about the environment, wanted to move back to California. He's like, okay, well, I can get a job at like a couple of nonprofits or at the California Environmental Department. And by the way, they hire 2 people a year. Do I think I'm one of 2 people nationwide that can get this job? Maybe, but it seems hard. And in fact, there are far more people interested in impact-driven law, even though the salary is like 3x lower than corporate law, that it's really hard to get those roles too. So all of this to say, if you are like fired up about being a public defender, if you are certain in your blood that you should go to law school, have that, then go for it. But I would say be pretty certain, because I've seen so many people that go to law school immediately or after a year or 2 because they aren't totally sure. Law school seems like good, other things seem hard, it seems like a certain thing, and then down the road feel really frustrated and trapped and everything there. So there's my mini law school rant. I can share more details or questions if you want to talk about specific things, but yeah.
And I think one thing to consider too, that I think is not often on the radar of undergrads because it's not a field we often offer in undergrad, is the world of public policy, which public policy and law work like this together. But I know a lot of students, like when you actually start looking into public policy programs, Georgetown has a great one, that kind of is more in line with like people who do public policy or public administration do go on and then work for nonprofits, advocacy, government positions, and often the debt to pay ratio is not as extreme as law school. And there's also dual degrees too that I know people can get into. So that I think is something to consider.
I totally agree. McCall is great. Georgetown's law school is also great. My sister went there. Like, it's a great school. Many of these law schools are great. But yeah, I think I've seen so many people that feel like they want to go to law school and then are interested in policy. And I would just say, like, be really thoughtful about that, because a policy degree or just like work experience can get you a lot of the way.
Yeah. Or I think Georgetown is starting up the Green Earth Initiative, which, as it's like cornerstone right now, is a Master of Science in Environmental Sustainability, if I'm not mistaken. So like if, you know, environmental sustainability, justice, climate control, sorry, climate change. I'm not talking about driving in a car. If any of that is something, you know, looking for those like MSC's programs in environmental sustainability could be an interesting way too.
Totally. And like, if you look at the share of like congressional representatives or congressional staff, like I think it's like 35% of current Congress people are lawyers by training. Like it's disproportionately like a lawyer town. And one of my friends is super passionate about agriculture policy. And she's like, if you just like do any amount of study or work on agriculture policy, you will get into so many rooms and be an expert there, because no one does that. And so thinking about like, okay, if everyone's going down this path, how can I be different? How can I be distinct? How can I follow my passions and build up an expertise in something and then come back to the policymaking? Because policymaking for a purpose, for a specific thing, is much more likely to be tractable than like policy making globally by understanding the process of lawmaking, but actually really just understanding the like minutiae of law implementing. I feel like I'm over bad law school. I'm sorry. But...
Yeah. One question I was hoping you could get to a little bit is, what are some of the common myths you see that folks have about what social impact or social impact companies are or aren't?
Yeah. I mean, I think folks will totally discount it and say, if I have student debt or if I like want to have a certain lifestyle, I need to like totally discount working in social impact, which I think it requires intentionality. There are very low paying jobs there, but it's not impossible. I think similarly, folks will often worry about like promotion and opportunities. That's where my head was at senior year. It was like, I don't want to end up in a dead end, you know, project coordinator position and maybe get promoted to senior project coordinator, but then there was no up from there. And I will say, it's a real risk. It depends on the organizational culture and how they think about promotion, opportunity, path. there are some organizations that you have an outsized opportunity to lean in, to grow, to take on management responsibilities really quickly, because that's the culture. And if you're doing the work, then that's great. And then there are other places where there are dead ends. And so I don't know if there are any like myths that are wrong. I mean, I think a lot of the stereotypes are grounded in some like, global experience. In general, stereotypes lag like 10 or 20 years behind the truth, right? So most career advice you get from parents or other folks is like what worked for them, which is great, but it isn't necessarily what works now. And same thing with like stereotypes about the field. Like things you hear now are probably grounded like, it takes a while for them to like filter in, and it takes a long time. We do this all the time with like unpaid internships and like this notion of like, oh, well, you just take an unpaid internship if you were committed enough. Like all of these sort of like lingering things tend to stick around. So I don't know if I have a great answer to that, but yeah.
Any other questions for Phil? No? All right. Well then, Phil, I turn it over to you. Do you have any last words of advice for folks job hunting, internship hunting in the social impact space that you wish someone had told you when you were in school?
Not really. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that when I was in school, I was super annoyed at the Career Center and at other people telling me to network. That was like, I'm like, to what end? And when I was a junior in college, I went to the like nonprofit career day or whatever, and I walked in. It was so stressful that I just like turned around and walked out, because I think there's this like super anxiety. I mean, I'm an introvert, but like there's a super anxiety provoking sense of like, I just need to like talk to people. Like, why? To what end? Like, am I just like networking for the sake of it? And what I've seen since is just like understanding the benefit behind it. Like my personal goal is for the rest of my career to not like just apply cold to like a job, maybe ever. Like I want to be talking to people, learning about what's happening, building connections so that they know I'm doing good work, so that I know they are doing good work. And then when an opportunity arises, going to work there. There's so much power in building relationships, and particularly as you're working to get your first break, it's incredibly helpful for them to have met you and have a sense of like a face to the name and liking you, versus a stack of like 100 pieces of paper or resumes online, where it's harder to distinguish from like bullet points on a resume like who you actually are and what you can do. And so the number one thing that separates folks in terms of like outcomes in the job search and like continued growth onto their second and third job are the folks that are like proactive about building relationships both within the organizations they work in and across the field. Even if you're an introvert, having that sort of like proactive sense rather than like sitting back and being paralyzed by fear. I was totally there, and I've since learned that like it's both helpful tactically and super helpful for just like learning about stuff. Like so much of the stuff I've talked about today is from like learning and talking to other people. Like I've never gone to law school. The only way I would know about all of this is from talking to like 20 lawyers and asking them about their experience and the different dynamics. Like if you're interested in a certain field, like you should absolutely talk to people that have done it. Like I thought about going to business school. I talked to people that went to business school. I talked to people that didn't go to business school. And I like ended up deciding not to go because I was, for a variety of reasons. But I think I saved, looking back now, I'm like, wow, I saved myself a ton of financial commitment and stress and all of these different things, because I took the 5 or 6 hours to talk to a bunch of different people that I admired that had thought about this. And so I think there's a ton of power in that, not from like a daunting sense, but from a like actually learn about what you want and like build connections with people that are doing the work. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And if anybody has any questions, can they go ahead and reach out to you, Phil?
Yeah, for sure. If Beth hasn't sent it, phil@secondday.org, or you can practice your sleuthing and try and figure it out from our website too.
Yeah. All right. Well, Phil, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we, like he said, there's a deadline coming up for their fellowship program on April 4th. I put the link earlier in the chat. So, hopefully we get some good Hoyas your way. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out to Phil. If it's more general career stuff, you have the folks at the Colley Center. We're always happy to help. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.